So the Fireside chat, I'm going to welcome very soon Kate and Nick. Before that, just a quick word about myself. So I'm Denis Dorval. I'm all fine with Denis. I gave up on Denis, right, a long time ago. So I'm the COO at DueDil. I joined back in March and looking after all client-facing, customer-facing operations and the business. Prior to DueDil, I don't come from a financial services background. I understand there's a lot of financial services representative there. I'm more a guy coming from the tech side of things. And prior to DueDil, I had the luck or privilege to work for two interesting companies over the last 15 years. And there is a common theme with these two companies, which also tie well into what we are doing here at DueDil. It's about disrupting existing markets and or creating new markets. So I had the chance to join a UK-based company back in 2006 called Alfresco, led by actually a US entrepreneur as well, but also a UK entrepreneur, CEO John Powell. And it was about disrupting the enterprise content management market, document management, with a new business model, open source, which obviously had ramifications into the economics of what we had to propose. But very interestingly enough, it was also about innovation, how to innovate more, quicker, in a market that is very stagnating. I joined, we were 25 and doing virtually zero. And I left, we were doing 100 million and in a very, really good position in terms of leading that market. Actually, we were in that lead, magic quadrant, in the leader right, quadrant for ECM. After that, so I've done that for 8 years, and I was looking after Europe and Asia. And I joined another company called APG, so API management, a leader in that space, quite kind of techie, but actually you'll have heard even CEO now are talking about APIs, right? Because we're moving into digital. Digital is a lot about being API first. I joined there in 2014. We were US tech company this time and a private, about 40 million, and I left 5 years after. 2019, 100 million. An interesting journey, private, pure NASDAQ, but also acquisition by Google. So I had the opportunity to work for a very large company, for 2 years. But that was an interesting journey, and now API is all over the place, right? It's how you create ecosystems. It's how you make, digital journeys frictionless. I love that word. So hopefully now we have our two guests, and my joining DueDil also is because I do feel there is the same opportunity at DueDil. It's about disrupting an existing market that needs to be better served. That market has been underserved, by many players, including on the tech side of things. And there is a booming, right, opportunity in the SME market. We can do better, yes. Call it, after the launch of, right, the incumbents. That is some of what we do, but we also bring more innovation and give tools to customers like funding options that probably would not have been in a position to really acquire that type of tools, some years back. So that is really, really exciting, and we are on that journey with Justin and the rest of the team here. And I'm sure, right, we're going to start talking about interesting things now with Nick and Kate. Are you guys mic'd up?
Yeah.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Please have a seat.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick and Kate, for joining us today. And we talked a lot about this market and the potential of hyper-segmenting, real life monitoring. I think that this Fireside chat is going to be taking a slightly different angle around how also large companies see the SME market opportunity and how some core practitioners that actually supply digital platforms to large enterprise that help them engage with SME also see that market moving forward. But with no further ado, and maybe just to introduce yourself, right, and the company you work for, Kate, right? Can you share a bit of that with the audience here?
Yes, for sure. My name's Kate Elsam. I work at Gartner and I lead the sales support programs for Gartner. So we have a sales development global sales development program, and I run that function. And the purpose of that is to support both our sales development people and our account managers acquire and serve our customers better. Within that, we also run a lot of programs to think about how we better, overall acquire and serve customers, whether that be through data strategies, whether that be through the types of tools we use, and so on. And previous to that, I worked for a company called CEB that was acquired by Gartner in 2017, and I launched and ran our SME business for in EMEA. So I did that for a number of years. So some of my experience with the SME segment comes from there as well. And prior to that, I worked across at CEB for about 15 years in a wide variety of sort of product and advisory roles, both here and in the North America segment.
Thank you, Kate. Nick, tell us a bit about yourself and quickly also Validis. Validis, who happen to be partnering with Funding Options, right across the street.
And with DueDil, we're very happy about both of those things because you're just both sides of the street, so it makes it more simple. So good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Haider. I'm the General Manager for Validis in the UK. Like Denis, I've come to financial services from a slightly different background, from a tech background and a data background. I worked for a number of kind of technology companies and ISPs, going back to the time when people used to ask, do you have the internet? And subsequently for a data management startup that was acquired by Experian. So I spent some years working with Experian as well, and have been with Validis for the kind of last year and a half. What we do at Validis is very much put into the discussion that's being had here. I think with DueDil give you the complete history and outlook of how a company looks by looking at the data. We take the management accounts that company runs right up to the minute and present that to you. We kind of like to think that we're giving you the DNA of the company to go with the history of the company. So that's very much the area that we're in.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Before we get into the meaty part of that fireside chat, maybe just a level setting field question to you both very, very quickly. How do you define, each, right? The SME market. Is it by revenue or is it by number of employees? What do you do at Gartner, Kate?
Yeah, we define it by revenue.
Okay.
We have a reasonably broad definition, so then we sub-segment within that.
Okay.
Traditionally, we work with the very large enterprises, so we define SME as anything up to 500 million.
Okay.
But then we break that down into sub-segments because obviously there's huge differences.
Okay.
Between a sort of 10 million company and a 500 million.
Yeah, $500 million, that's a pretty nice,
pretty
right, SME. That's a sort of SME, right, we are definitely thriving, right, to become here. And you, Nick, any specific views on that?
I think, like everybody, we struggle with how do you do the categorization. When we look at some of the businesses that go through our platform that our customers deal with, in any given month, we've seen businesses being, at one end of the spectrum, borrowing 20 grand, and at the other end, 10.5 million, and they're both kind of defined as SMEs. So the way that we do it is very selfish and very Validis-centric. What we do is build APIs to pull their data from their software. So we're defined by the software that they use. Right. From the Excel at the sole trader end, right up to when we start bumping into big ERP systems like Oracle and well, not so much Microsoft, but SAP. That gap there, that's who we're discussing.
And just quickly, as a show of hand, who would in the audience categorize themselves as an SME? Raise your hand. Or mostly large enterprise or enterprise here. So, Kate, as you said, Gartner is a large company now. And it has traditionally mostly targeted enterprise side of the market. So tell us a bit about your experience of targeting the SME market within Gartner. Is it now seen as an important market or opportunity for Gartner?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's our fastest growing segment globally. There's just huge opportunity for us there as a company. So my experience in targeting that market started when I was at CEB before the acquisition. So we didn't previously have an SME business. As you noted, we were focused entirely on the enterprise. So when we sort of launched into that market, I think we completely underappreciated the diversity of the market, probably not helped by the fact of how broadly we were defining it. And so, so we went out with our first couple of products and launched into the market. And unsurprisingly, we could acquire customers reasonably easily because we didn't have any penetration at that point. The problem we found was retaining them. So after the first year, we had we'd done really well in selling to clients. Then we're a renewal, a subscription-based service. We tried to renew them, and we couldn't do it. We had terrible renewal rates, and unsurprisingly, what we found was that the needs of a CFO, let's say, at a small pharma company, family-run pharma company, were very, very different from the CEO who is at the online, very fast-growing tech business. And we didn't have the scale at that point, nor was it financially viable to be creating propositions for all of these customers because we'd just gone everywhere. So what we learned very, very quickly was that we had to take a much, much more tailored approach. And we'd already segmented to some extent by geo, but we realized that for subsequent launches, we would only launch in one country. And we narrowed down even where we'd already launched. And then we looked at factors such as the revenue size, as we've talked about. We looked at the ownership structure of the company. We looked at obviously the industry they were in. We looked at the type of executive that we were serving, right? So was this somebody who would have known CEB or Gartner from a previous large enterprise? Is this someone that's worked globally? Those types of factors. We also use the fact that we speak to all of these customers to say, well, what are we hearing? What is it they want? To sort of better then go out and target the market. Of course, the challenge was finding all this information.
Well, I guess so, right? But
Yeah.
you're describing quite, in detail here, a great business case, or let's say situation we end up,
Yeah.
ourselves being in terms of the need for hyper-targeting or let's say real-time monitoring. But how did you manage also? Because usually what we see a lot is, yes, the C-suite level, okay, it's an interesting business, but renewal rate is very poor, etc., and everybody's busy, so you can it, right? Sort of, let's not invest. So how do you manage to flip the conversation towards, right, actually, we can do better, and we should be spending more time and potentially investing more into analyzing what's going on, because really there is something out there. Because that's something that we see a lot, right? Some of our, customers, especially large, struggling with, right? There's a lot of lost in translation, from the ground, up to the level.
Yeah, and that was a real battle. But at the end of the day, for an organization like ours, the only growth is to either create more products, but because we sell functionally, right, to heads of different function and their teams, there's only so many functions in an organization, or to sell to different types of organizations. And so there are a limited number of enterprise-wide clients you can go after. And so it was well understood at the organization. We had to make a success of this. And so, yes, there were several false starts. And it was only by understanding that, there was an arrogance, right? That we understood the enterprise market and it would behave in the same way, and it doesn't. That we had to be a lot smarter and get a lot more sort of in-depth understanding.
So it's a top line sort of a discussion in terms of growing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's a growth discussion.
Nick, you've been working a lot with large enterprise to Gartner really in financial services space, and you're working with big banks.
Yeah.
Obviously with fintech.
Yeah.
But mostly from what I understand, large financial institutions and banks in particular. And how do you see those large financial services companies, right? Coping with the new opportunity out there in the SME market. How do they see that opportunity themselves, and what are their challenges there from your experience?
I think there is no doubt that they all see that there is an opportunity that they are sitting on, that they are under-exploiting or under-leveraging. All of them. I mean, we know the statistics say that if a small business is going to look for a loan, the first place they go is their bank. And often, if they don't get there, they stop looking and go for friends and family, whatever else. They're sitting on this opportunity, and I think they're all of them being driven by a number of different market drivers, such as cost and efficiency, and the fact that bright companies like Funding Options are using technology a lot more efficiently. All of them are looking and wondering, how do we start to exploit this in a much more efficient way? So they're seeing that that opportunity is there. They're also understanding that they have this customer base that they don't really understand enough. One of the consistent questions, how can your data help us identify the point of need for the SME, as opposed to they've come to us when they need 25 grand because they've hit a bump in the road with their cash flow. We'd like to have more of a relationship with them. We'd like to be predicting things for them, etc. So they're seeing those things happening, and they know they need to take advantage of that or change their business model.
How do they relate or see the competition out there, right? You know, fintech in particular. There is definitely a lot of traction, fintech, in banking in particular,
Absolutely.
but in the B2C space, right? You know, and actually CSAT shows that. There was an article recently about Monzo, Starling Bank are, way up in terms of the CX or customer experience. And there is a move, right, towards the consumerization of the B2B space. But
absolutely.
so we see the Funding Options and a few others going after the SME market now progressively. How do the big banks or financial institutions to react to that? I know that we have a lot of insurers also, but I guess that apply to them. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I was with one of the larger insurers just last week, and their, the project we were discussing was exactly that. Let's take a consumer type workflow and see if we can apply that for our small business. Customer base, because actually, given who they were, they have a real breadth of product, and what they need to do is start to bring that to market to SMEs in a way that they can consume that more efficiently and more easily. So I think that they are all very aware of what is going on. We talk about industry buzzwords. The buzzword of digitization and streamlined process and better customer experience are all drivers that they know they have to try and deal with in some way. They see the use of data and the use of technology as a path to get there. I think there are a number of pitfalls that maybe they go through. One of the primary ones I would say is one of process. Often what we see is not so much, now I've got this data, how could I use it, or how could I change my process? It's more, how could I plug that data into my process, which is maybe not the most, maybe not the best way to start thinking through the way to utilize it. If you look at the way that a good analogy would be that the low-cost EasyJets and air companies, the way they completely deconstructed and then reconstructed the online with the booking process and getting rid of ticketing and queuing and all that sort of stuff. I think that there's a real opportunity here for the larger organizations. Now, we all understand that they are held back by compliance and legacy systems and the size of the organizations and all those sorts of things, but they are definitely starting to look that way. And I think that the data and technology approach is one that is definitely being adopted.
Thanks, Nick. I'm just being now reminded about the 5 minutes.
All right.
So we have two more questions, right? Kate, I mean, we touched on that. Digital is all about speed. Everything goes faster, and expectations are also higher on the customer's, side now, including the SME market. And there is definitely much less inertia for SMEs to move really, really fast. So how do you, as an organization, react to that speed of change when actually there is a bit of an imbalance mismatch between, the speed at which you can go yourself as a large organization, and on the ground floor, it's going, 10x, faster. How do you reconcile that and integrate that into your go-to-market or business around,
Yeah, well, we actually serve them quite differently under Gartner now. So whereas the research that we did at CEB was more of a large-scale annual big piece of research that we would sort of go across the full year on, we quickly realized that doesn't work in an SME space because the needs, as you say, they move so quickly. So we have a different model now where we sort of create just-in-time research through analysts that speak to the customer on an ongoing basis. So that's one. How we go to market, we used to go to the market and we used to serve an organization. Now we serve an individual, so we sell a seat versus an enterprise license. What that means is, as you speak to that individual, you have much more intimate knowledge of their needs and what's happening. And as we've scaled, you can begin to see across different segments those needs, and then quickly respond on the back end with the research model that we've got. The third piece that's changed then is for our premium products, we have something called the executive partner. Now this is someone we hire that has experience working in that function in a similar setup. So in the SME space, we're hiring people who have worked as executives in SMEs to then advise other SMEs.
Okay.
But then, so they understand the problems, they can sense when something's changing, and then again, they can feed that back very quickly into our research model. So the products just become a lot more responsive because we recognize that this is our biggest growth opportunity, and we couldn't do it the way we were doing it for the enterprise segment.
Very interesting. The refresh cadence is much, much higher with the SME market, and that's where actually technology helps, right? Or finding the right partners for that, right? I think I'll have to tell my sales team that we have a prospect with Gartner now. But moving on to another, right, for you, Nick, I know that you pretty much, big in this. Last couple of years, there's been a lot of work done on getting the financial ecosystem a bit more open and more digital. And the regulator, CMA here in the UK, has been really at the forefront of that. With things like open banking. And that now, comes to the SME market, right, with, the possibility to start sharing, more data openly with, trusted third parties, etc. So what sort of impact this will have, you think, and to what extent you have seen SMEs, having a high propensity to be willing to share that data with third parties, provided, I guess, they can get out,
It's a very good question, and one that we think of a lot of the time because our business model is built on SMEs sharing their data. There is definitely a growth in the propensity to share data. I think that comes from a number of things. Firstly, there's familiarity. Every SME is also a consumer, the people that submit the accounts. They're used to an exchange of value. I'll give you my email address, you'll give me a Gartner report that I can read. Then there's something around compliance that we're seeing. So, across the piece, we were just asked recently by the HMRC to help them with a study on enabling sole traders to submit self-assessment more regularly. That's a study that they're doing. How can they digitize that piece? Obviously, making tax digital is probably the biggest example of where the compliance world has started to directly affect what SMEs do. I think there's another area of convenience, which as some of the bigger organizations in the room, the more convenient you can make the process, the more likely they are to work with you. We had an example with one of the banks where they said, we've got some companies that really are quite reticent, that are quite obstinate. Can you help us build a slightly different process? We built them something as a beta and said, look, what we'll do is month 1 we'll handhold them, month 2 we'll handhold them, but slightly more distant, and month 3 we'll expect them to do it ourselves. We were quite fortunate that month 1 went very well. When we rang up a couple of the companies to say, right, we're ready to hold your hand again, they came back to us and said, don't worry, this is much better than what we were doing before, we've done it already. So if you can get to that level of convenience, that helps. And I think the fundamental piece is the value exchange. There's a perception thing. If I'm giving you my data, what am I getting back for it? Sometimes it's a mandatory thing. If you want to go through this streamlined digital process and have a decision in an hour, that's one thing. Where it's more involved, where there's more kind of back and forth required between maybe a bank RM and the SME or the insurer, the underwriter and the SME, then I think the more you can start to give them not just a perception, but some real value back, the more that propensity grows.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you very much, Kate, for those insights, right? I think we have just maybe one question. We are over time, but maybe questions from the audience to the panel here, especially on the open data movement and open banking. I have a question for you guys anyway. If there is anybody that has seen also the movement towards some of your SMEs as clients or use case where they are leveraging open banking, i.e. the capability they have to give their consent for a third party to use directly, right, their bank account, SME data, to process a risk profile or things like that. Have anybody, right, involved in those type of implementations so far? I guess that's a bit more work. What about you, Nick? Have you seen, concrete examples of open banking being actually action out there, in the field?
We're starting to work with a number of people that are doing that and providing, a lot more insight. We're seeing, for example, the forensic accountants are quite interested in the reconciliation of what the management accounts say and what the business transactions have actually been, and that's one of the things.
That's definitely one of the insights we see, right, for the very long term, right? Back to real-time monitoring. Not only there's a lot of data and insights that will keep being produced by players like us, but that will be progressively enriched straight through with banking account, data straight from the SME account, as it is already legally possible, right? And the various players start, right, offering those type of services. Thanks again, Kate. Thanks, Nick, right,
Thank you very much.
for your